Kick it off.
Okay. I welcome all of you to this webinar. It has been long overdue. We're supposed to have it quite some time before, but it's all good to have it today. So today, essentially, we want to hear from, first of all, I am Museme Alex Martin. I am a human rights officer with Strategic Response International. Before I go into the theme of the day, I'd like to ask to know something small about Strategic Response International, and then thereafter I'll introduce the topic of today, and then introduce our panelists, the people who are going to discuss with us the issue at hand. So Strategic Response International is an independent, non-for-profit network of young pro-democracy, human rights, and social justice-oriented lawyers in Uganda. It was incorporated in 2017. It unites pro-democracy and human rights lawyers to provide robust legal response on matters that undermine the principles of democracy and human rights through litigation and across Uganda. The organization nurtures and mobilizes legal practitioners with a particular interest in pro-democracy and human rights, building a network and enhancing peer learning to pursue social justice by public and strategic interest litigation, policy research, and advocacy. The network currently has over 140 lawyers all over Uganda committed to the promotion of democracy, good governance, and the protection of fundamental human rights, political and civil rights, through strategic impact litigation and research. The mission of SRI is to strengthen the foundations of democracy by nurturing a new generation of young pro-democracy and social justice-oriented lawyers across Africa. And our vision is to create a society in which an informed and active citizenry is sovereign and makes choices based on civic consciousness and civic empowerment. And as such, today, in executing our mandate and our mission and our vision, we are holding this webinar to try and unpack the human rights issues that emerged during the COVID-19 pandemic, which necessitated many countries, many places all over the world to undertake strict measures, among them a total lockdown. Many countries took on a total lockdown where every activity almost came to a stop. The same applied to Uganda. From March up to around late May, there was strict lockdown. So today we want to hear from people who have been interfacing with issues to do with human rights, mainly lawyers and human rights defenders who during this time had victims, who approached them. They were going to the rescue of people whose rights were being violated. And generally, as human rights practitioners, we want to hear the experience of the people who have been in this area during this time. It is now from March to, actually the lockdown nearly continued, just they kept on easing. The president of Uganda kept on easing slowly by slowly. So we could say the lockdown took on more than 4 months. Today with me on the panel, we have Dorothy Esakiai. She works with the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders. She's a lawyer. She will introduce herself more. We also have Counsel Gawaya Tegule. Counsel Gawaya Tegule is a human rights lawyer and he's a criminal defense attorney. We also have Mr. William Leslie, you know, the other Mr. William Leslie Amanzi. Mr. William is a human rights defender, and he has been on ground. I should say he has been so much on ground during this time. So he will share with us the experience of human rights defenders using his own examples and his own experiences. Without any further talk, I would like to begin with the lady, Dorothy Esther. Brief introduction, then we shall proceed to Council Gawaya Tegule, and then William.
Thank you so much. My name is Kiai Dorothy Esther. I am a lawyer by profession. I work with the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, Uganda, I'm a protection officer under the Protection and Emergency Department. Briefly, the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders is a membership organization and of both individuals and organizations. And our mandate is protection of human rights defenders, which basically we do through 3 programs. That is protection and emergency, capacity building, advocacy and networking. And above all, we are the one-stop center for human rights defenders issues in Uganda. I am glad to be part of this discussion, and I hope that we learn and relearn going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Tegule.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and I'm happy to be here. I work as a human rights lawyer. I do criminal defense. For avoidance of doubt, I'm a member of the Forum for Democratic Change. So some of my comments may risk or just may sound a little on the other side, but I hope that with this background, people understand where I come from and what I do. Because that's not about to change regardless. But I'm happy to be here. I'm meeting SRI for the first time, and we're excited that
Okay.
does need a lot of human rights defenders to be everywhere, because there is injustice everywhere.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Tegule. William? William is muted. I pray that he's unmuted. Okay, yes, William, you're now unmuted.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be here this afternoon so that we share quite a few things. My name is Amanjuro William Leslie. I'm the team leader of a small organization or a small pressure group called Friends of Zoka. Our interest is more centered on environmental protection, and what we do is much in relation to investigative part of what people do against our environment in terms of issues to do with logging businesses in the Western Nile and in northern Uganda, the commercial charcoal trade. The charcoal you guys use in Kampala, most of the times, it's charcoal from our devastated environment here in Western Nile, and very specific in Adjumani. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, William. This SRI hasn't organized this alone. It has organized this with Digital Human Rights Lab. I'm sure those of you are able to see the screen. You see Digital Human Rights Lab. Digital Human Rights Lab is mainly involved in bringing human rights issues in the space, and that they are part of this. They actually they have helped us convene this because it's matched their space. We are also under support of the GIZ under their program of strengthening governance and civil society in Uganda. And this project is particularly run by and funded by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. SRI, during the pandemic, that strict lockdown, undertook a small project, I should say, where we began tracking human rights violations, mainly the state violations that were being occasioned by the state. As many of you saw, there was a bit of a gap there where many of these violations were going on, and then people were whining and complaining on TV, but there were fewer, or maybe the documentation we felt was going to be a challenge, because as we all know, many things in Uganda have happened and people forget. This one is beaten, another one is shot, and people forget. So we undertook a small project of a human rights tracker where many violations that were being occasioned across the country were documented and filled in a database, and we still have that information. That information is furnished to key places, key organizations, including lawyers, and we hope to take on many of those and bring to book the people who occasioned those injustices in coalition with, we could be in coalition with the coalition, you know, and also Council Tegule and others, so that no wrong goes unpunished. Now, to kick this off, I would like each of us to share their experience during the pandemic, and mainly those first weeks where things were a bit tensed up. I know lawyers who were not part of essential workers, and as such, we had to go to our homes and stay there, and clients or people whose rights were violated were left in a bit of a situation where they could not access courts, lawyers. Note that courts were also rendered a bit, you know, I don't know, I will leave those statements to Council Gawaya Tegule, who has the liberty to state them, him being a politician. So let us take it off with actually Council Tegule. What was your experience like during mainly the first weeks, let alone months of the lockdown?
I don't know. I think the first thing I want to say is that all of us, quite understandably, were a little tense. Many young people were experiencing curfew lockdown for the very first time. For those of us who have been around for decades, this was nothing new. We had gone through lockdown, we had gone through curfew. We knew what it meant not to dare venture out of your house. So this was nothing new, but for the younger people, this was very, very novel unto them. But one thing is clear, all of us were on tension, and quite understandably, because Corona is a new thing. And like any new disaster, you take time, or you need time to understand it. You need time to understand the dynamics thereof. You need time to just see how it is progressing. How does it infect? How does it get transmitted? How does it, I mean, what can it do? So all of us were basically on tension. That's understandable. I think it was therefore no surprise that the government ordered lockdown, because again, that's what the whole world was doing, and it made sense at that time to do so. What what was, however, lacking, I think, was as lawyers, we're looking at the legal framework that enables or that's supposed to enable government in such a time. We're asking questions on what basis is government making the decisions it's making. And I think if you look back at that time, you discover that the constitution had been set aside, if you like. It had been completely suspended. And we were basically under martial law for all intents and purposes, under martial law. And many of us thought that was improper, because at any time when a nation is under crisis, the first thing that one ought to pay attention to is the legal framework, legal and policy framework, because at that time it may be necessary to suspend certain provisions of the Constitution. And I think the Constitution thankfully provides for that in Article 110. But we saw the Constitution suspended, and not only some parts, but literally almost in all parts. And then the army basically took over, and then law and policy went overboard. So I think we were uncomfortable that the country was being managed without any properly defined policy and legal framework. And we thought that was wrong. So if you look at what was happening, you discover that the problem at that time in the initial stages of lockdown was not the coronavirus itself. It was rather the legitimacy and the prudence of the government's approach to the crisis. We thought it was very much wanting in terms of policy, in terms of law, in terms of human rights broadly. We thought that the essence of human rights had been completely thrown out the window, and the country was, for all I care, moving on presidential, if you like, on presidential directives per se. All that people care about is what has the president said. And a lot of the time, and it always happens with military governments, it always happens when you have Bushmen taking over power unexpectedly. You have the president being more powerful than the Constitution.
Have we lost him? Okay, we shall come back to Council. He seems to be talking, but oh, you're talking, but we're not hearing you, Council Tegule. Okay, we shall come back to you, Council Tegule. Actually, you've preempted me a bit. You are among those people who came out openly to criticize the president for illegally imposing the measures. So we shall talk much more about that. You went ahead and wrote an article, if I remember, where you challenged the government on the powers that they were using to impose the measures. Let us hear from you, Esther. William, as you get ready, William, I see you've gone off a bit. Your video is off. Esther, please.
Thank you so much. I must say that the pandemic found literally everyone unprepared, including the state. So it put us in a certain state. And definitely when we see the World Health Organization announcing about the coronavirus on 31st December 2019, then January 30th, they declare it a global outbreak. And that is when we take it on. Uganda as a nation, we also take it up. But as we take it up, we find that what do we do? That would be the question that we would ask ourselves. I'm going to talk from maybe the point of human rights defenders. I don't think even the human rights defenders were ready for this, because when the pandemic is announced, we have measures coming in place We have directives being given to us. We have the lockdown coming on board. We have curfew. I mean, for some people, words like curfew are new, lockdown, you know, the whole experience is new to everyone. We have declaration of non-essential and essential services. So people are asking themselves, what qualifies to be essential and non-essential? We have closure of schools, places of gatherings. So all these banning of public transport, all this is, we are looking at, when we look at human rights defenders, we now say, how does the working environment of a human rights defender be affected in this regard? And definitely it had an impact on the programming of human rights defenders. I must say, even the coalition as an umbrella organization, we had to embrace the new normal. We had to have sanitizers with us. We had to have masks at the end of the day. We had to inform our donors, which I believe was also happening to human rights defenders. Everything was just changing drastically to face the pandemic rather than addressing some of these issues. I want to believe that our survival instincts as human rights defenders come on board, meaning we can easily put aside the issues that we are meant to, you know, look out for as human rights defenders, the human rights issues, and focus on survival. So that is one of the things I learned, as in everyone is trying to survive in this sense. But violations are going on, abuses are going on, crimes are going on, but then we all have to survive in this jungle, the new jungle that is the pandemic environment at the end of the day. So the social distancing, everything is new. We have to mentally prepare, we have to physically prepare for all these things at the end of the day. So when it comes to the coalition, we think about response. How do we respond to human rights defenders' issues? Because movement has been stopped. Access to justice has been stopped. Work is no longer defined by going to office or to the field. You have to embrace the new normal. So you're asking yourself, how do we respond to issues of human rights defenders? How do we change? Programmatically, we had to sit as a team, rethink, and see how we respond. We had to embrace online digitalization was the thing that now came on board. Now you have both urban human rights defenders and grassroots human rights defenders. Now, if you're responding to each, you have to remember how is this category, how are the various categories responding to virtual work, new normal, digitalization? Do they have the gadgets to even, do they have even the resources to be able to share some of these issues? Because virtual means you're going digital, you're online, you have to have data. Then we are looking at the mobile companies that provide this internet. Can they handle, can they manage? Are they reliable? Is network everywhere on ground? So you find that getting even to the human rights defender to share with you their issues, monitoring and documentation and reporting is changing. And how do you keep evidence of what is happening on ground? We see that, I mean, we couldn't ignore, you could not ignore the legal issues that come with the pandemic. They were new, they needed time to think through so that they're able to address some of these issues. So ignoring the legal aspect of the pandemic raised quite a number of questions from human rights defenders too. Were they involved? The directives are given, the standard operating procedures are given, but are human rights defenders involved in the decision making? To give the human rights-based approach to some of these measures that come on board, we see that they were not regarded as one of the important people that could inform whatever directives were given. We are looking at directives vis-a-vis implementation. You get it? So the human rights-based approach is basically ignored. So how does a human rights defender now begin to enter into a system that didn't even seek for their guidance, consent at the end of the day? However, the pandemic becomes an eye-opener to to all of us. Diversity, agility is a requirement that was needed for even human rights defenders to manage their human rights defending issues. So equally much as the human rights defenders were affected, even their clientele were affected. So you're now both faced with the same thing as a human rights defender and also the victims. You're all in the same bubble. So those are some of the dynamics. Who helps who, yet you're all helpless at such a moment. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Something Esther said that we all went into survival mode. For once, we left everything we were doing and decided to first look after ourselves. That it really shows you the kind of danger in which all of us were. I mean, because I think that is like the law of the jungle, survival first, the rest can come later. William, you will please share with us your experience. I no longer see his video. I don't know what the problem is. William?
Yeah, but Martin, even
please,
as
may William
comes
unmuted.
in.
Hello?
Yes, William.
Hello?
Yes, William.
You getting me clear?
Yes, sure, we are.
Oh, thank you so much. In Adjumani, in Western Nile, northern Uganda, the story and it's very different, As human rights organization, what we do, our work is centered around environmental protection. And many times we do this, by traveling in our private means, hiring motorcycle from friends, having this public gathering, trying to see how to connect the dots. Immediately when the lockdown was enforced, this massively affected us because one, when there was a levy on public gathering, we knew this will mark the end of our intervention in terms of its holistic approach where you interface with the citizens, where you interface with the locals on the ground. So this gave us really a hard time because we could not penetrate our systems to get information from our, informers who are on the ground. Then two, the issue of public transport also affected us a lot because we do not have capacity. We don't own our means of transport. Most times we rely on the public transport. So meaning our work was curtailed. But then interestingly, when the army came in, when the police came in, when the security agencies came in, some of us have not been on good page with them. So this gave them, a leeway to truly even start hunting for us, Like a person like me, I had to really reduce my private walking, my private movement, even in the town centers. But you can see the army, you can see the police move closer to your home for reasons you do not know, for reasons you don't understand, okay? But then somebody claims we are patrolling because we don't want people to have gatherings, even at homes. Now this gives you a hint that it is not only an interest of trying to do a patrol so that to avoid community gatherings, homes, but then it gives you a hint that you see this could be another way of tracking you down, another way of surveilling whether are you within and what you're really doing. And you see now for us the twist was also worst because it aided the massive destruction of our environment because it aided the huge military involvement in the destruction of the environment. We did some work secretly when we were cynicked in Imoyo. That was in May. And in Imoyo, we got a log deposit that covers around 7 football pitch. Clear the place where logging is taking place. Interestingly, what is there is the place is guarded by the military, okay? Both the army of Uganda and the army of South Sudan. Okay, then also this lockdown aided the army in a massive involvement in like charcoal business. Adjumani is a very interesting district. You see trucks of logs, trucks of charcoal leave this district daily. But interestingly, when you make a follow-up, there is a military man behind every truck that leaves the district. Now, for us, we are curtailed such that we could not go ahead to investigate. We could not get in touch with our informers because we didn't have the necessary tools that that we could use to try to see how to mitigate some of this impact. So at the end of the day, you know, our community involvement was cut down. Our movement was reduced. We could not move. We sensed issues of surveillance against us. So it also made it hard for us to, you know, like in Adjumani, I could not move in my village freely because I knew what it means. You know, if they get you at your friend's home, that also becomes a concern, you know. But then what really gave us a strong blow is when Adjumani confirmed a COVID-19 case. When this case was confirmed, it's like, you know, confirming to the country that you need more deployment in Adjumani than in any other part, you know. We could see the military everywhere, marketplaces, wherever they are. So this literally made it hard for us to even, like me, I could not even have an opportunity to move to town to go and, let's say, buy some airtime for communications. I took it upon myself to rely on trusted borders. You get in touch with them, you know, and you send them, please, can you go and get for me some airtime worth this much? Or can you go and get for me this kind of goods that I need for my home services and the rest of it? And then also, you know, the military had already earmarked members or friends of Zoka, meaning any member of Friends of Zoka who is seen in town must be trailed and found out where he or she is actually going. So all these things were quite many and they were quite huge for us to really understand and for us to really go through it. But nevertheless, we tried our best to see how we could mitigate it. We tried our best to see how we could still get in touch with our grassroots personalities. I can tell you, interestingly, in one of the sub-counties, our grassroots informer had the military deployed in his home. And the gentleman could not do anything because every day these guys are at his home and these guys are telling him, we are doing monitoring. But interestingly, the guy sees them load logs, he sees them load charcoal. And you know, the instigation is that they knew that this guy gives us information. And each time they're loading logs, they tell him, we know you are seeing us load logs, but if William gets to know this, it's through nobody but you. You can imagine what kind of reality this is. Meaning, if I get the information that they are loading logs, there is only one suspect they have because it is done at his home, you know, and they believe as you know, as soon as they do this loading of the logs, you see, the trailers hit the main road. Interestingly, there were no people on the main road. The transportation takes place during daytime, it takes place during nighttime, it takes place anytime because there's nobody along the road as we used to be. You know, previously we used to keep around the roadside, try to check which truck is moving and how heavy is this truck. You do such kind of imagination. You communicate to your colleague who is in Atiak. Your colleague in Atiak also tries to see, because we normally know how some of these trucks are driven. When they reach checkpoints, you see huge envelopes exchanging hands. But now during the envelopes exchange hands, you only see military signals and the trucks pass. So really, our work was highly affected. Our work was heavily affected. We could not virtually do many things, but then we had to keep on And you know, one of the principles that we cherish as human rights defenders is, you see, being non-violent. Much as these guys were quite violent on some of us, but we chose not to retaliate. And by the fact that we wanted a peaceful life, yes, we literally now decided to keep ourselves at home. Thank you.
Okay, William, thank you very much for that, for that quite rich information. Council Tegule, before you got a network issue, you are still making a case for the illegality of, I don't know whether it is the illegality or rather the blatant unconstitutionality of the measures themselves, that lockdown that was ordered. Also from William's experience, we've been able to realize that there were a number of issues. I don't know why I'm getting an echo. There were a number of issues that have come out, whereas in Kampala and other places we thought we thought that, well, the environment can now breathe, we've gone into a lockdown, things will be a bit okay. We've noted from William that actually people were stealing from the environment, stealing from nature, cutting down trees and using that time to steal. I'm sure, Councillor Tegule, you can have a better word, being a writer you are, the writer that you are. So I'm wondering what the position of the lawyers was in all this. Yeah, I understand Dorothy shared that lawyers also went into survival mode, but I want to hear what, faced with such a situation, whether there were circumstances where maybe lawyers, like you, went to rescue the situation. Of course, I know it must have been amidst heavy hardships. I want to hear from you, and also you can continue with justification on questioning the justification of the lockdown. Councillor Tegule.
Great. Thank you, Martin. I think there are two things we need to understand about this government. One, I do not think that Mr. Museveni and his government took power for very good reasons. I think they had, regardless of what they tell us, regardless of what they write, I think they had private, highly private personal reasons for taking power. One of those was to entrench themselves permanently. The other was to enrich themselves till kingdom come. Now, they managed this crisis to their advantage to attain those particular objectives. They used this time to stifle the opposition because the opposition could not mobilize when an election year and all the opponents of the president are under his shoes. They're under lockdown, they cannot move, they cannot talk while he's doing that. But secondly, his armed forces are doing exactly what we've always accused the government of, that is plundering the nation. We know very well that a lot of money was spent during the COVID time. Most of it was taken by governmental officials. I know army officers who were carrying around sacks of money while the rest of us were in our houses, fearing to go out and being beaten if we stepped out. The army officers were busy carrying sacks of money around. Their vehicles, their lorries were transporting commodities, hardware commodities basically, to continue building their houses, apartment complexes and stuff like that. As William has rightly pointed out, even forests were being exploited during this time. So for me, I am seeing Mr. Museveni as the man I have always known. He's no politician. He's no statesman. He's just a gunslinger who put the country hostage. Let me also make it clear. Uganda has been under lockdown since 1986. What we have seen was just a tip of the iceberg. For those of us who have been here for all this time, we can guarantee you this country has been under lockdown for the last 34 years. It's still going to be under lockdown until that man leaves power. So the COVID time really exposed the government for what it was. The wise men tell us that circumstances do not make a man. They only tell you who he is, what he is made of. And in COVID, we have seen the president and his men in their true colors, just armed men out to enrich themselves and nothing else. Our concerns as people were really none of their business. And to me, that was the saddest part of this whole thing. If we're having a health crisis, then a responsive and responsible government would immediately establish ways in which the common man can can survive in those circumstances, because you have lockdown, yes, but the needs of the people are not under lockdown. People need to eat. People need to move. People need to get this and that done. But most of these, for the means of getting this done, were basically delegitimized. You cannot move. You cannot transport this and that. You can't use a border. You can, even if you have a sick person, you cannot transport them to hospital unless you have access to the RDC. How does everybody get to the RDC when they have an emergency, a sick child, a pregnant mother? So we saw many people losing their lives just because the government in charge was using the crisis not to respond to the needs of the people, but to ensure that their ulterior objectives and motives were being actualized and fulfilled. And to me, that's what the problem was. So the concept of human rights in the COVID context then becomes a little disturbing, because the rights of the people were on a collision course with the interests of those in power. And that's why we saw many people being killed, many people being injured, maimed. We saw patients dying on the way to hospital because they could not get means of transporting of getting transported to hospital in good time. So we saw a whole lot of things. But for me, as a person who has been around for the last, I'm now going to be 50 in 6 months' time, I can tell you that this is what we have known this government to be. The interests, the needs of the people are none of Mr. Museveni's business. Get that from me. He doesn't give a hoot about you and I. All he cares about is how can I stay longer in power, and how can I keep anybody who wants to get power down under my feet. And if you understand that equation, then you'll understand everything that happened.
Council, you realize that at the time, the disease or the virus was spreading so fast, yeah? Almost every country was equally taking the same measure to lock down, to Museveni called it that in the bush they used to halt a bit, then listen. So one would argue that actually this was a good thing to order a stricter lockdown so that lives are safe, because you know very well that lives are more important. I think it's better to live than, and then the rest can wait, the economic interests can wait, you know. So don't you think it was much better to order the kind of strict lockdown? And in any case, Uganda has, you know, lost very few people due to COVID compared to other countries that took this as a joke. So, and President Museveni was emphatic in saying that it is better, caution is better than regret. So don't any ounce in you that thinks this was good. After all, it was even justifiable. You know, they went under the limitation of other rights for public interest and public health. So don't you think that was a good thing in any way?
Martin, there is a reason countries have constitutions. If people do not believe in constitutions and constitutionalism, then they should not bother coming up with constitutions. If you put up a constitution, then better be sure you're going to stick with it and comply with it. If the constitution provides for a state of emergency and provides for procedures under which the country can be protected from the excesses of the state, a responsible government, a responsive government will follow the constitution. The Public Health Act, for all its worth, was made in 1935. I'm 50 years old. In 1935, my father was not yet born. Now, you can't use a law like that to take care of emergencies 85 years later. It simply does not make sense. The Constitution was made 25 years ago. That's a more recent thing. If the Constitution is in place, let's consider what it does. What it does provide for in times of crisis. And Article 110 is very clear. The president must declare a state of emergency. And the reason for that is that it provides an organized framework under which the country can respond to the emergency at hand. It provides for an organized framework which puts the excesses of the state under control. It puts an organized framework under which citizens can enjoy the protection of the law regardless of what is going on. When you put the Constitution aside and then begin to make orders that are outside that Constitution, and that presents a complete antithesis to the provisions of that Constitution, then you're not being a democratic leader. As a matter of fact, you're not being a responsible leader. And that is exactly what happened when Mr. Museveni began assuming control of the situation. Now, let me say this. A responsible president will want to take the lead in times like this. When there's a crisis, a responsible president must show himself strong and say, guys, we're under pressure, we're under attack, this is what we must do. But in doing so, he cannot begin by putting the Constitution aside. And to me, that was unacceptable. And now, even the rules that were made, the statutory instruments that were made, were only brought up when we began questioning the legality of the presidential directives. That is when the president woke up and said, okay, fine, we need to come up with all these laws. If you notice the dates of the presidential directives and you notice the dates of the statutory instruments, you'll see a very big disconnect, because the SIs were made long after the presidential directives were issued. Now, some of them were even overruled the following day by the president himself. So there was no organized framework. Now, when you're running a country, you don't do things like that, because there is a reason people put constitutions in place. You better respect what the constitution provides for. And when you do that, then people shall be protected. Lockdown would have been okay if the constitution had been respected, if the human rights of people had been respected. But then you see the armed forces, who include, unfortunately, the LDUs, poorly trained, unpoliticized in the sense of they have little knowledge of law and politics, but they have been equipped with guns, with apparent authority to shoot at will. This was happening, and you cannot have a country like that, Martin. And that's why the bulk of the people who have gone down in this crisis have not died because of COVID, but because of the way that government managed the crisis. The response of government to the crisis was highly questionable, highly illegitimate. And if we continue like that as a country, we are doomed. Make no mistake about that.
Okay, thank you very much. From his submission, realize that he makes a case that human rights was suspended within the Constitution. So that makes it very hard. That made it very hard for even human rights defenders and human rights lawyers like you, Dorothy, to work, you know, and we already mentioned that. So I am curious to know from you, Dorothy, how you navigated, you navigated the situation, how you met clients beyond your survival, because in any case, the demands of work were still there. Yeah, you cannot. So, but I'm also curious to know how you were able to, if at all you did, access court, you know, in regard to human rights issues and also defending the human rights of the people, you as a human rights defender, but also as a lawyer.
Thank you so much. Like I had said earlier, it was everyone entered survival mode, but what did we do as a coalition? One of the things that we did, we sat as a team. And like I said, we had to unlearn in this situation. One, we had to know that work is not defined by going to a workplace, meaning you can work anywhere. And that was one of the messages that we were sharing with the human rights defenders. Two, we worked with our grassroots human rights defenders on ground in the various districts and sub-counties to respond to some of these issues. And some of the strategies were, some of them were volunteering to be on the task force, because we had to get coping mechanisms of how do we help human rights defenders. Maybe for the people that do not know, who is a human rights defender? A human rights defender is any person who individually or with others fights for the rights of the people. And a human rights defender has no qualification at all, as long as you stand up for the rights of others, you defend them. That's what a human rights defender is. And Article 38 of the Constitution gives a clear description of who a human rights defender is. So we are not talking from a point of just a definition, but we see that our Constitution also talks about the work, and you have to do your work peacefully. That is one of the key things. So in such a situation, one of the things that we did as a team is, one, we talked to our grassroots structures. Two, we had to facilitate in terms of digitalization, that is facilitate in terms of internet, airtime, because that was the first basic strength that we had while communicating human rights defenders. Also, we work with the state actors like the police, with their legal and human rights officers. We quite do some collaboration with them when it came to responding to those issues. Definitely it was hard. I'm not going to say it was very easy, but we also work with our partners that are also in these various districts on our referral network to respond to the human rights defenders issues. Two, our programming had to change to suit the situation so that we are able to communicate and respond, that we were able to support our human rights defenders. They had to be relocated. They had to have transport. Some of them had to get, had to move, at some point you walk a distance, at a certain point you walk with the available transport. But we tried as much as possible to encourage human rights defenders, one, to stay within the directives and standard operating procedures. That was one of the things that we had to accept, that because if you did not, then you would get into double trouble in terms of that. Also, we also had to talk to our various partners that support us on how the programming had to shift from protection services to also deal with the issues of human rights defenders. That was the challenge that we had. You now have support that is meant for the normal. Now you have a new normal. How do you divert to that? So we had partners that also gave out more of this support, like food, the basic needs that human rights defenders needed. We also talked to our service providers, even the lawyers. We had to talk on phone for some of these issues. They had to work on phone remotely and also with the grassroots structures to embrace digitalization, online payments, because that's the guarantee if you have to facilitate someone to support any human rights defender at that point. We also had to do a level of advocacy. That means you're going to use the social media platforms to communicate to the human rights defender, and also are able to communicate to you. But what are those lessons that we learned? I could briefly share. The pandemic exposes the weakness of the different state institutions. That one we have to acknowledge, because no one was prepared for such a time as this. And I think, like Council Tegule raises it, having a systematic response mechanism or system would have made it better, even amidst the challenge. Here's his article sharing, why don't you declare a state of emergency? Then there are procedures that even if we have gaps in our state institutions, we procedurally address the issue. So because it wasn't there and we come when we are unprepared, and maybe the government chooses a very ad hoc way of managing the situation, hence some of the issues that he is raising, you start questioning, to what extent are these directives going to go? Is it, because you cannot ignore legal issues in a pandemic. You can't say legal issues cannot arise out of it. We are looking at survival, food, and all that. No, for every action that happens, there have to be legal issues that are raised. Hence the lawyers raising those issues. Declare this a state of emergency and help. Then the other thing is, of course, we also notice a weakness where under the immigration, people are entering into the country because some of these issues are what we see put human rights defenders like journalists, online bloggers or media personnel, when you report that there is illegal entrance into the country, and they are the very people spreading the virus. So some of the issues that were raised were very, very key. We also noticed that in the health sector, we still see the poor health facilities and the services that are happening down there. And this is what human rights defenders are trying to share with the world. We also saw that the nurse that really tried to help out the lady that was in labor. So then the security sector, manned mainly by the police and the local defense units, we also saw the human rights violations that were happening. But to the cry of human rights defenders, it reached the ears of the president, hence telling them to pull out, because this is what human rights defenders do. You have to speak out. But in a state where you cannot move, you cannot do anything, you have to use the digital platforms like social media to give your cry out there. Also, we some attempts by the state to try and find was to Kampala and Wakiso. So it leaves out the other parts of the country, which also poses a challenge. And also in the distribution, you find that there are issues that are raised. What are those issues? The distribution is unfair, there's corruption, the quality of food. You look into the issues of human rights that are being violated. Even the right to food, what sort of food are we giving to the people? Then the other thing is the role of civil society or human rights defenders was underplayed by the state. They were not involved. I think that's one thing to take note of. They were not involved or getting any representation in the sector to also discuss the measures that were being implemented. It's one thing for the president having given us the directives, then the implementation, because that's what we question as human rights defenders. is it to the benefit of the people? So there was a disconnect when you look at all these things, because human rights defenders were not involved. And also, like I said, freedom of expression was also affected, because anyone that attempted to write on issues of how are the COVID funds managed, you know, how are they distributed? What are they going to do at the end of the day? If anyone wrote an article demanding accountability, you find that they were pushed, they were threatened, hence pushing human rights defenders into self-censorship at the end of the day, to avoid things like unlawful arrest. Because in any case, if they arrested you, you did not know where you were being taken, the courts were not functioning, the lawyers are not essential in any case. So you find that a human rights defender is almost tied. The hands are tied because they are scared for their own safety and security. So you see the dynamics a human rights defender is faced with. They are faced with their own human rights issues, but also even when they try to express or share to the world what is happening out there, what are the risks they face? Those are the risks. Access to justice wasn't in any case present. In some instances, some of the human rights defenders shared with us, where if to stop certain human rights violations, they were now removed away from those places and were taken to deal with the issues of the pandemic. So what happens? The perpetrators take advantage of such gaps, because everywhere in the workplace there's like rotational work. So you don't find a fully functional police station. You don't find a fully functional government department. You don't find a fully functional Uganda Human Rights Commission. Yet these are the places that human rights defenders go to report their issues. So what happens? The perpetrators take advantage and they will hit at the human rights defender at all costs at the end of the day. So us as a coalition just had to work within our structure, work within our focal persons, work with the various state agencies like police that we have collaboration with, to, in one word, the other, response was not as effective as it was, but for the human rights defenders that we worked with and we supported, we were able to relocate them to safer places, we were able to enhance their advocacy strategies by providing facilitation in terms of internet, airtime. So we had to work remotely with what we had. That was what the survival was, having coping mechanisms in the time of the pandemic. Thank you.
Yes. I don't know what happened. I just went off. Okay. Thank you. You, in your presentation, you spoke in tandem with what William said about the threats, the arrests, the perpetrators. I mean, it's amazing that human rights defenders had to go through that kind. And you can imagine, William is in Germany and he shared his story, as someone who, hey, let me put on my video. As someone who is far up country. We saw William was in Adjumani and he shared with us his experience of Adjumani. But surprisingly, even in central Uganda here, where media is, where all the eyes are focused, we experienced violations. You remember a whole LC5 of Mitiana. Yeah, I think it can be categorized as a human defender. It was trying to deter the LDUs from beating someone, clobbering someone, and he was himself wrapped up and beaten. You know, it's amazing. We also saw ladies. There is also someone in Ginger, I forget the name, who was trying to rush someone to hospital, and that same person was injured. So you kind of see the dangers human rights defenders face. There's also another head teacher in Mukono who was trying to explain to officers that, you know what, this one is my worker, please permit him safe passage home. He was beaten and died in Mulago the other day. So it's when you talk like that, I think it really sheds more light on the kind of dangers that you as lawyers and you as human rights defenders face. I don't know whether William is back. We could William, I don't know whether William, are you there?
Where has it gone?
Oh, it could be the network. I hope he hasn't been. He wasn't fetched and refused from sharing more, because honestly, you could see that from his sharing, the situation was rather very dire. A witch hunt, people being witch hunted, and I don't know, Council Tegule, did you have some clients, you as a defense counsel, did you have some clients coming to you mainly who are trying to protect rights of others and they, themselves were victims of violations?
I think as human rights lawyers, we receive lots of calls from people who know and who want to run to us in times of difficulty. I think we had very many cases of what people providing leadership, because I believe in human rights defense, you're basically providing leadership besides the assistance that you may be conferring upon your charges. I think we had several cases of people trying to do what is right, trying to point the way forward and getting in trouble for it. I think we had lots of those cases. I think some were able to respond to, many more we could only advise and say, you know what, check step ABC. Let me see which lawyer is around there who I can talk to. Let me see who is there at that particular place, maybe a police station. Somebody can give a call and say, Afande, that is our man, this is what's happening and stuff like that. We had several cases, by the way. I think, it was just like being in a war situation, and then you have all these kinds of ridiculous cases of human rights abuse being occasioned all over the place, all in a short span of time, and then you have to respond to all of them. And I know that many of our colleagues, I know Isaac Samakade was heavily involved. I know Aaron Kiza was heavily involved. I know Nicholas Opio was one of those heavily involved. And people had to improvise heavily to get to particular places. I know Aaron at one point had to hire a lorry, to hire a lorry basically, put some matoke and sacks of this and that behind, and then travel to, I think it was going to Ginger. People had to be very, very creative. But at the same time, we also saw the need for resources that as a human rights defender, because if Aaron is hiring a lorry to transport himself to Ginger, he better have money on him. So again, I saw the need for human rights defenders to have some kind of access to financial resources when they need them. And like in that lockdown, I think there was a bit of a crisis. You need to go to places, but you cannot get there readily, except you're able to improvise like Aaron did in that case. And that means money. And it was not always there. I think in the initial stages of the lockdown, I think I personally was not able to respond by going to places, but like any other crisis, over time, you begin to understand the dynamics of the situation. You begin to become creative and see how you can do A, B, C without following what you usually follow. And so we were finally able to respond, I think when Stella Nyanzi was, I think she had a demonstration of her food. We were able to respond. I think she had about 15, 30 people who were arrested. We were able to go and respond to the arrest. We went to CPS, we went to Uganda Road Court and stuff like that. I think later there was also this Nana is always demonstrating anyway, so I even lose count of the times we've been to, but during that, I think on 2 or 3 occasions, she was arrested for demonstrating. We had to go there also to rescue her. But I think also in that time, then LastNet, Legal Aid Service Providers Network, I think got some stickers, 2 or 3 stickers. So they were able at some points to send vehicles to pick us and transport us to various police stations and courts and stuff like that. I think sometime we went, I think even as far as Kiriandongo, the time that Aaron's lawyers were arrested, when they'd gone to sort out issues there. So I think over time we began to get some kind of rhythm and build a momentum that enabled us to then respond more effectively. But I think the beginning was a little difficult. Back to you, Martin. Has anybody seen Martin? Has he been kidnapped or?
No, I'm here. I'm here. At times I forget.
Oh, I thought that come for you.
Well, they don't finish all of us in there. Yeah. So I thank you. I really remember Stella Nyanzi being quite involved in defense of the rights of others during that time, and you also coming. I think every week she was engaged in. Dorothy, you had something to add.
Yes. Now, I think like council raises it, and also William raises it. Human rights defenders were in this dialogue. Some of the perpetrators on those COVID cases were the very people they had to go and face and get permission to do work, yet they are the very people that are in conflict with them. So the human rights defenders would come to the coalition and say, how does one begin? You get it? So you imagine that sort of what? Dilemma that we're in. And yet you've been told advocacy, dialogue, but at that point, how do you begin issues of dialogue? Get the very constituted team on the task force, the very perpetrators that are actually committing some of these violations during the COVID time. Most people took advantage, most perpetrators. And any human rights defender that tried to talk about the various issues, he could talk about illegal logging. There were those that were having those cattle markets, you know, their business was going on, but the people are like, it's unfair. If the directive is to everyone, then it can't be to special people. So those were one of the things I wanted to elaborate more. The other was working remotely. We had to go back to the drawing board and work with the basics. And I think like council had put it, most of the time you'd call the advocates and they're like, I either hire a truck or something, or I know how to maybe ride a Bajaj, you know, according to how the lockdowns went. If you didn't have those extra skills, then my dear, the response to going on the phone, advice and bargaining with the very perpetrator that you have to, you know, keep yourself. So went back to the basics of, at the end of the day, how do we cope amid this? Because we had to survive it anyway at the end of the day. But impunity went on behind the scenes. Our minds shifted to the survival mode and left some of the issues that were to be addressed. For example, poor service delivery, health. If you reported in terms of poor health service delivery, then you had a problem. Yet in actual sense, that is what is happening in our country. If you reported about malaria or tuberculosis killing people, other than focusing on reporting how good the situation is being handled, then you are going to be looked at as a perpetrator, because human rights defenders stayed focused on the real issues that were happening, because it's like prioritization now came. Do we prioritize COVID vis-a-vis human rights? What do you choose as a step? Because you're dealing with human beings and not a virus. In any case, the virus has to be to humans. So the human rights defenders are asking, how do we balance issues of human rights vis-a-vis talking about our survival, not even in terms of our basic needs, but in terms of the virus that doesn't even have a cure. So some of these questions are tough, but had to be brought out. And some of these got the human rights defenders in trouble, but they had to speak out. So impunity just increased as like I said, at some point, self-censorship from HRDs, survival from HRDs, but some of these things. And how do you record? Let me give an example of lawyers at the end of the day. Even them, at some point, they are employees, because we had human rights defenders, they lose their jobs. Even the advocates in the law firms that we are calling and have been laid off. So how does one begin to work? So in terms of that, how do you give evidence of what is there? If you can't record, if you can't share some of these things, if you didn't have the resources, then that means effective response wouldn't happen. Response happened, but it didn't happen as effectively as it ought to have what happened, even for human rights defenders. So some of these things, maybe discussions would like the Uganda Law Society, now that we have a new leadership, to discuss some of these things in regard to advocates. You find that advocates, we are looking at issues of employment, but no one is also looking at the employment issues of the advocates themselves that we are dealing with. And at the end of the day, we'd like to help the human rights defenders. We are not also looking at their other aspects. So maybe as we go forward, maybe giving ourselves what should be done. Then aspects of mental health well-being were ignored. But this was a time when the mental health well-being of any person, of human rights defenders, but also the service providers who are lawyers, ought to have been taken into consideration. Yeah.
So So in regard to what you've been saying, I don't know whether William is back so that he shares more. I keep on having to switch between accounts. In fact, actually, Dorothy, you raise that issue of the Uganda Law Society, and so I'm wondering if we get another kind of catastrophe that is the magnitude of COVID or even more. I'm wondering how we shall be able to demand that we are part of the essential workers, because from this discussion, it is clear that human rights defenders and lawyers, are key, because it's like from what Councillor Tegule was saying, and you and the experience of William, people wait for these unfortunate events, powerful entities to begin abusing rights. It takes us back to the dark times of the 60s, 70s. People just wait. So it's important to have human rights defenders and human rights people being available to ensure that violations. So I'm wondering, and that is a question to you and the people who I'm going to ask to begin sharing. I'm wondering how we, as people who are conscious, can demand more to be part of the essential people. Yeah, in terms of being available, for service in the event of any catastrophe, because I don't think this is the last catastrophe, really. Catastrophes are going to keep on coming, and where lives of people are going to continuously be endangered. And now we see the environment is among the critical issues. So I'll ask, I don't know if anyone has a question. you can raise a question or a comment or just an addition from the people who have been listening. You can also share in the chat room so that we continue having this discussion. Yes, Council, you can unmute yourself, Council Teguli.
I was just saying that it is in this COVID crisis that I found myself riding a bicycle again after more than 27 years of not touching any, because it was the only way I could move from my home to go to a police station or to go to court, and that is until last minute got the stickers. But before then, it was just about how do I get a bicycle, and riding a bicycle in Kampala is such a hard thing because there are hills all over the place. So it really was a tough call. But maybe one of those things we shall laugh about and say, okay, well, that was one heck of a time. But having said that, I think we need to, the question of lawyers as essential service providers, I think we should never be debated at all, because every time a citizen comes into contact with the state or with any organ of the state, then a lawyer, a human rights defender becomes imperative, because without that, then the rights of that person become immediately compromised.
And that is why we should never have waited
for arguments to be made in saying lawyers should not be allowed. The moment government is touching base with people, lawyers must immediately be set free to move to access these people.
Because if you notice, I think so many people are jailed. Look, courts are not functional properly. Lawyers are not coming in, but people are going to jail. How do you explain that? And for the record, I was disappointed with the judiciary. I thought the Chief Justice ought to have come out better, put his foot down, and told the president that lawyers are essential service providers. The moment you are sending the armed forces out onto the streets, you should send the lawyers to go along with them. Because look at the catastrophe we witnessed. People being jailed because the magistrate says, I can't listen to you, this is a COVID time, you go to jail. If the courts have time to send people to jail, why don't they have the time to give them bail? If the courts have time to receive accused, or if you like, suspects and charge them, why don't you have time to let the lawyers come and argue their cases? I mean, this was a human rights catastrophe, and I invite the Ugandan Law Society to look at the way forward and say, this should never be allowed to happen again. I would like to challenge the Chief Justice and his deputy, after all this controversy about his appointment is over, I would like to challenge them to set in place a mechanism whereby lawyers can never be disengaged from their publics. It should never happen again. You can't say, I'm meeting the police, but I can't access a lawyer. I'm being arrested by the army, I can't access a lawyer. That is human rights catastrophe at its best, and may this never happen again. So my appeal is to Fiona, our Law Society president, just make sure we never see this again. It was shameful, it was despicable, it was catastrophic. It should be condemned within the strongest terms possible. Back to you, Martin.
You know, actually, it's interesting how in Uganda, I don't know whether as human rights lawyers we weren't, I don't know, strong enough or vibrant enough or vocal enough. In Kenya, lawyers were considered essential. They even took on the government to court, and actually court sat and listened. You could also have a question about Kenya. The court in Kenya was vibrant enough to rubber stamp itself and say, look here, we're operating and we have to hear this matter. I think also as maybe lawyers, human rights lawyers, mainly because it's us that was so much in the thick, given that clients used to come to human rights lawyers mainly, there are more chances of a human rights lawyer getting more clients approaching them than actually commercial people during that particular time, yes. So I don't know if you Dorothy, you have more comments on that particular.
Yeah, I think he has put it well. We should not debate the legal fraternity. I think for me, that is a message that should go out there, even to Uganda Law Society. We shouldn't debate the legal fraternity. Two, there's no event that happens and you expect no legal issue to come out. Even as we are talking right now, there are so many legal issues that are coming out. So to act without putting a stronghold or emphasizing the importance of having legal advice on any response mechanism, even from the state, really, for me, is something that shouldn't be debated upon. I'm also looking at our Uganda Law Society. I mean, we need to know when to hit the nail, and not have conversations much later to defend the profession, because if it's not defended with what we have, then who is going to defend the lawyers themselves? So the platforms that we have should be able to come out and strongly speak on some of these things. I think also it gives a chance to lawyers to think outside the box. I think it is key. Now, like we are embracing digitalization. In Kenya, you would have Zoom and all that, everything delivered online, and digitalization emphasize and say it is possible to actually have justice delivered. So I think as lawyers, we need to think outside the box on how our profession should be diverse to embrace whatever challenge comes on board. The other thing is, in terms of safety and security management, it is also key to the legal fraternity. I think it's one of the things lawyers tend to either ignore by the fact of the profession. You feel like I know the law and all that, but you need to address things of safety and security, because even as you're responding to human rights issues, you're going to be faced with threats, you're going to be faced with risks. And if you do not know how to manage your own individual or even your law firm's safety and security, you will be at court and your law firm is raided. You could be somewhere else, and if you don't protect your information in terms of digitally, lawyers should embrace some of these things and have discussions around it. How do they deal with such issues of safety and security when it comes to when they are responding? Because even in the pandemic, the errands also were faced with higher risks. In case anything happened, in case they were arrested, who would know? So they have to have like issues of safety and security management, security plans of when I am going out, should I expect? What shouldn't I expect? So that they are able to also respond to their clientele, even in a place of crisis. So they have to look within before they also look without. So that's one of the things that even law firms or law organizations should revisit. I think the pandemic gives us an opportunity to rethink the strategies in our firms, to rethink what is work for an advocate. Can they work remotely at the end of the day? How do we count results other than sticking to the old method of doing work? When it comes to data management and securing it, how are lawyers having discussions in regard to this? How is evidence going to be embraced in this digital era that now we are going to? Some of the things the law has to change, the law of evidence has to change, so that it also eases the work of any lawyer that needs to deliver some of these things, because I believe those are, then even discussions within Uganda Law Society, the different clusters, on how to improve the working environment of lawyers going forward, because another pandemic, another crisis will come, and how do we handle, especially when it comes to also job security. Lawyers also faced being laid off and what, but are law firms discussing some of these things as I respond to some of the issues that a law firm may be called upon to to respond. Maybe also the other things of usually the pro bono lawyers are usually the first ones we think about, but we need to have a discussion around that also, because commercial lawyers have a different perspective, but also the pro bono lawyers are also. Then we also need to prepare our clientele. Let me imagine I'm responding to a human rights defender. How am I going to explain the circumstances that are there? So mentally preparing our clientele for what lies ahead at the end of the day is very key, because it will help us manage expectations, even as we are churning our way with the government or state and emphasizing the importance of what? Having the legal fraternity given its due respect at the end of the day. We have to mentally prepare, but also prepare the clientele to manage expectations. Working paperless is going to be now the way forward, and embracing the digital era at the end of the day. So those are some of the things I thought would discuss, but also for human rights defenders, this is the time to embrace the new us, virtual work, even to have more trainings on how do I sit here and I am actually.
Ask a question.
Thank you. Yes, Council.
When you say that,
Council Tekule, you're asking Dorothy a question?
yes, because
Yes,
she said in those times, then the first people you think about are the pro bono lawyers. And I'm asking myself, who are the pro bono lawyers? Are you by any chance saying there are those lawyers who do not need money, and therefore those are the ones that you want to deal with, as opposed to the commercial lawyers who would be now like the lawyers who, for them, money is their whole world, and without money they can never do anything? Isn't it time maybe that we began addressing lawyers as lawyers, so that even the so-called commercial lawyers have a sense of duty towards the oppressed, sense of duty towards those who cannot defend themselves and who cannot speak for themselves, so that at any one time there should be help available wherever there is a lawyer, other than saying, okay, you're in Kampala and there is, okay, who do we call? Tegule, let's call Aaron Kiza, let's call Isaac Samakade. But how about there is Hussein Kashiling is around, and Fred Buema is around, and you say, those are commercial lawyers. Maybe they cannot do anything in this case. I think maybe we need to have a conversation on extending, so that let lawyers be lawyers, so that they're able to respond to needs where they are. Because for me, I think ministry is how we respond to the needs of those around us. If somebody is near Fred Mwema, they should expect to be assisted, even though he's a known commercial lawyer. If anybody is in prison and Hussein Kashiling is the next guy nearest to them, I think they should have a right to expect that they'll get some assistance because there is a lawyer around, other than categorizing us into the pro bono lawyers and then the commercial lawyers. What do you think?
Yeah, before you answer, Dorothy, I actually agree. I mean, even within us as lawyers, human rights lawyers, still it's very unlikely that we shall refer a case to people we know are so enthusiastic about people who have cut themselves out as commercial people, or people who handle family issues, or who handle other matters. It's very unlikely, yeah? So I don't know, maybe you could also address, my fear also.
Okay, thank you so much, Council. Thank you so much, Martin. And yeah, you raise a very key issue, and I think it's a lesson that maybe we ought to learn as a fraternity, because one undermining of a human rights lawyer today in court could equally get you as a commercial lawyer, because in any case, people look at it as one profession. So if we categorize ourselves as pro bono or human rights lawyers, and me, I am not, today, if one is disrespected, tomorrow, the same thing could actually happen to you, even as a commercial lawyer. I think going back to the discussion of pro bono, I think the pro bono scheme there has to be a way it should be improved. I remember on the Pro Bono Day last year, when Honorable Jacobo Olanya was talking about the challenges that are also faced even with the word pro bono. At the end of the day, how many lawyers even want to identify with the word pro bono? But it's supposed to be more of giving back. Council put it very well, ministry at the end of the day. But our scheme, our law, is there a law on it? Is it weak? Is it strong? Does it even encourage, for lawyers to be proud to give free legal support and advice? And I know Uganda Law Society tried to, it has an app, there's an innovation they had, Leader War, but such things of improving the pro bono scheme is also key so that it accommodates even the commercial lawyers in any case if they came. But I'm also for the fact that lawyers should be lawyers at the end of the day, because when we talk about a lawyer, we expect that they will respond to the various people at the end of the day. So forgive me for having said pro bono lawyers, but usually they are the ones we encounter, or human rights lawyers. They're the ones that we usually encounter and deal with and discuss some of these issues, whereas some lawyers don't have interest in some of the human rights issues, even when you engage them, especially when it comes to responding to human rights defenders. Even some human rights lawyers are skeptical to respond to our human rights defenders. They are like, I will not go to that case, it has some political, because there are risks also posed with responding to human rights defenders. We should allow that. So not every lawyer has the guts to go and defend a human rights defender. So that's why at some point you have to rely on those ones, and you have to train them on the human rights defenders concept. Who is a human rights defender? What do they do? How do I defend them? And how will I speak in court at the end of the day? And that's why I was saying issues of safety and security are very key. That if a human rights defender came to your law firm, you're going to discuss the case, but also discuss the risk. You assess the risk that comes with this person, so that the response is really, really very effective at the end of the day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So Council Tegule, she has, I think, withdrawn the statement of pro bono lawyers. She has withdrawn the label, So we shall get a question from Brian, and then Simon. Simon seems to have jumped off, but he had a question also.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Brian Geoffrey Chanwat, and I work with Strategic Response International. Thank you so much to our panelists and moderator. Before I ask my question, allow me reiterate what Dorothy said. We who are doing human rights work are really just passionate about it. It takes a lot to be a human rights lawyer. We have colleagues who we always refer to and say, hey, help me go get bond here and there. Just go to the police, they'll be like, how much? How much? Yet for us, we have to put in our transport, we have to put in our time, we have to put in all the resources we need. So she's to some extent very, very right to call them pro bono lawyers, because they sacrifice a lot. The likes of Aaron Kiza, any time of the night they're available. Yes, so my question will go to, I think, both Dorothy and Councillor Tegule. In January, we saw a lot of regulations being passed. There was a practice direction which came in as an amendment of the Constitution, or to integrate ICT in the courts of law. There was also the Judicature Audio Video Link Rules of 2016, which were being followed up by that. And it came in January, and shortly after there was the lockdown, which automatically let lawyers be non-essential workers. So around March, we held a webinar on the same, on the incorporation of ICT into the courts of law. My question is, how far has this gone? Or now that the restrictions have been lifted, we have gone back to the old normal, where a lawyer has to go and file actual papers, a lawyer has to appear physically. The ICT incorporation is being sort of dropped back. I don't know, from your experiences, have you encountered anything like that? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Councillor Tegule, first take it from there. I'm trying to.
I was saying, come again, kindly.
Respond to Brian. Have you had Brian's question?
I did not get the essence of the question. Kindly come again.
His question was mainly on the incorporation of ICT in the judiciary. How do you think it has been operationalized? Have you interacted with it so far? I don't know if Brian have paraphrased your question well. Yeah. So that was essentially the context of his question.
Well, I can say there has been, I think, an attempt to set the judiciary on a journey towards digitalization. I think we're just beginning. It would be unfair to make judgments just now. I think there is a bit of it that we're beginning to see. I think there's a whole lot of things that have got to go into digitalization of the legal spectrum. I have a friend of mine from California who came here. He's a lawyer in Los Angeles, and he came and saw the amount of paperwork I had on my desk. And it's like, what's your problem? I was like, no, we're going to serve, we're going to file, we're going to do this. Said, oh, heck. Because you know, for them, a lot of things are now digital. You can serve somebody digitally in many states. And I think even in federal courts, there's a provision for that. You can do things electronically. You can have sessions being done electronically. So I think we have begun the journey towards that. In criminal court, I think we've seen sessions being held on video conferencing. I think that's part of it. We have now some limited provision for receiving judgments through the email. I think a lot of stuff is still rudimentary, but I think we're getting started. I hope there is complete political will on the part of the judiciary to make this a complete experience.
Okay, our time is fast spent. Dorothy, I think you'll handle all these. Let's first get some more questions and then we shall wrap them up. Let me hear from Douglas. Douglas, you're unmuted. You can ask your question. Douglas, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you so much, moderator, for all this discussion. I'm having the feel of what lawyers go through and what human rights activists go through during this COVID. Now, my question precisely is on there is the issue of pro bono. Earlier on, Dorothy raised the issue of pro bono, and also Tegule talked about pro bono. But also precisely, I had, there was a client which we had a conversation with just yesterday about attacking possibly either a lawyer or human rights organizations because they think that the entities that are doing pro bono work are paid for by either, there's obviously, either donor money that's they work with very closely, but also there's that sense of entitlement. And yesterday, just yesterday, I would say, I had basically an engagement with the client who had almost the same sense of entitlement, thinking that since this entity actually provides pro bono kind of services and whatnot, they are entitled to some of those services. And even to an extent of like saying that, he wants to, slap me in the face because there's a possibility of not, being given the service as and when they want, because there's that sense of entitlement. So how then do we address some of those issues? Because in my own view, I would say one, it's a direct attack towards people who actually work around human rights and also addressing things like that? That's my first question. The other question is also in relation to what Tegule said. If you may allow me the second question.
Yes, please. Briefly though,
okay.
Briefly. I want to go to Simon Peter.
Okay. In relation to also what Tegule talked about access to courts during COVID-19. So, and also, of course, the courts were operating, under special circumstances and whatnot. I would ask Tegule, what would someone do in the event if people are, of course, prevented from court, lawyers are prevented from court, but you find that there are other judicial officers, including prosecutors, are operating in court and clients are being paraded before court without any representation. I thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about the very aggressive client. Sorry about that. Simon Peter, okay, could you kindly unmute yourself and ask your question? Simon, are you in position to ask your question? Okay, so Simon Peter asked that, well, it's essentially what we're talking about, that he would like the legal minds to account for the gap between the judiciary and the Uganda Law Society. He was dismayed by the silence of the judiciary when the Law Society tried to come out. They had not much to do without the influential. So his question must be in regard to the fact that lawyers were not, considered essential, and also the judiciary closed. And then as the lawyers tried to come up, then the judiciary was a bit complacent in regard to trying to fight for themselves and also fight for the lawyers. Dorothy, you've had the questions. Please take it up from there. You can also comment on the question. Then we shall come to you, Council Tegule. If we have any other question, we can put them in the chat room or send them to me privately. Otherwise, we shall be closing in a few minutes.
Yes. Thank you so much, Martin. One of the things that I had earlier talked about is lawyers have to think about data management. How do they manage their data? Because then it will inform how some of these processes will go into being paperless. How do we store information? That means embracing issues like digital security. Because when you deal with digital security, then you start to talk about data and information management. It is very key for law firms. Other than having lots and lots of papers, you need to find a way to manage your data. How is it accessed? How do you embrace being more paperless at the end of the day? The other thing would be, does the public anyway understand what pro bono is? Have we made enough advocacy around it? Because even the word itself, pro bono, people keep asking you, what's the meaning of what? The word. We need to demystify and make it simpler for even the public to know. And how we package, like I said, pro bono lawyers also matters. The commercial lawyers have managed to package themselves. In this case, if I'm to have this debate, and the respect they are coded is different, but unless you've worked in human rights, that you come to respect a human rights lawyer, to actually know that it takes courage to be a human rights lawyer, not just any other person that can take it on board. So my advice would be that Uganda Law Society, then we need to work on that concept and demystifying the whole thing of pro bono, so that even the lawyer that is coming to represent me on a pro bono scheme is proud enough to do the work. Because regardless of whether you're pro bono or not, you're representing me, and I expect you to do your best, not to look out for points, because that's all that other lawyers tend to do. It's because they are saying, I'll get points, I'll get this, my PC, it is mandatory. No, it ought to come from our hearts that this actually serves community and maybe can help in case backlog and all that. So I think that is one of the things that Uganda Law Society ought to pick up and help to demystify to the public and protect human rights and human rights lawyers. Like I said, safety and security management is also going to be a key thing for all lawyers going forward at the end of the day, because you will have clients that are going to actually physically attack you. What do? You're going to represent a client, a political client, and they will raid. As soon as the client is out, you're also arrested and what? How do we protect ourselves in such, or how do we foresee and know how to manage certain circumstances? So about the gap between judiciary and ULS, I think it has to be an ongoing conversation. I'm seeing the current president trying to make strides. At some point, you have to go to the top people, dialogue, one-on-one meetings, and you see how it comes down to the whole service delivery. At the end of the day, what we want to see is better service delivery from the lawyers in Uganda Law Society. So I believe the steps they are taking towards that, and conversations and scenarios, because the lesson learned from COVID is the challenges that we have seen, the complacency. When you sit, these statements we keep making, Martin Luther, the statements we keep making that you just stay silent, you're worse than this person, also apply to us as advocates. How do you sit on your own rights, yet you fight for rights of others? We ought to also question ourselves and say, why were we silent when we knew that we ought to have what? Spoken and put our foot down. Yes, Uganda Law Society tried. It ought not to try, it ought to do. That is the expectation people have. So every time a lawyer tries, so you imagine, people will not give you the respect you deserve, but you ought to put your foot down and you'll be rightfully wrong. You'd rather be rightfully wrong, but at least it is known that you sent a message down. So we ought to be firm, even with the profession itself at the end of the day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Council Tegule. And I think we should also be closing.
Okay, just briefly, two issues. First, on the Uganda Law Society and the state. For me, I think that Uganda Law Society has a big problem. There is the general presumption that it is an illegality to go on loggerheads, to get to loggerheads with the state. And for me, I think if lawyers are going to be lawyers, then they should not be afraid to conflict with anybody, even if that is the state. I think Uganda Society is abdicating its mandate by trying to play nice with the government. I think law should be law. If the government is out of line, then Law Society should come out strongly and say what you're doing is wrong. That is part of its statutory mandate. It's not actually being over-enthusiastic or being anti-government. That is actually why it was established. That is why Uganda Law Society gets funding from the state. ULS is not a private lawyers association. It's the state bar. It is an aggregate of lawyers who are organized not to be managed by the state, but actually to execute statutory mandate. We must not lose sight of that fact. And the day we stop speaking out against what is wrong, I think is the day we stop becoming lawyers. We no longer deserve to be called lawyers. And then lastly, I think somebody asked about what happens if the judges are operating, the prosecutors are operating, but the defense lawyers are not allowed to be around. And I'm saying that is wrong. The Constitution as it stands actually outlaws such a status quo because we're supposed to be equal under the law, Article 21(1), but also the way the government managed legal practice, or if you like, judicial proceedings during lockdown, offended every bit of Article 44. And prime of which is the right to a fair trial, regardless of the circumstances prevailing in the country. That was wrong. And I'm so disappointed The Chief Justice could not even raise a voice to say, guys, Mr. President, what you're doing is wrong. I was so disappointed. And I also think Uganda Law Society ought to have come out maybe stronger to put its foot down and say what is happening is unacceptable, it is unconstitutional, it should not continue. My words are finished.
Okay. Thank you very much. You've maintained your stand from the beginning. And as we read back in, I think it was around July, at the beginning of July, on the illegality and unconstitutionality of the measures. Yes, Dorothy, as you close. Please unmute yourself, Dorothy. Okay.
Yes. What are my parting shots? As long as we have human beings, there will always be human rights, and there will always be violations and abuses. There will always be perpetrators, but we also need people to stand firm on the issues of what? Human rights. At the end of the day, we need to stand firm, we need to stay firm in the course of life as long as human beings exist. So it's nothing to hide about. And you cannot separate human rights from legal issues. Hence the importance of having lawyers or advocates take on this matter seriously. And not until a human rights situation comes to you that you get to realize why maybe we are having people like Stella Nyanzi on the streets. We are having activists. We are having these human rights defenders we think are mad, do not understand everything, or are sabotaging government programs and what. Not until we reach that point where we appreciate anyone that is defending human rights at the end of the day, and appreciate that protecting their working environment is key, so that they do continue advocate for human rights. So it's just one of my things. And two, catastrophes come, pandemics are going to come, things will come and go, but we need to be firm on the basic principles of human rights situation. We have to embrace the new normal. And we have to work within the standard operating procedures, unfortunately, or fortunately, but because it's not a good thing, it's uncomfortable. But what to do? We have to continue working with them and embracing them in our work as we continue doing. There were advocates that were just arrested for the fact that they were interviewing clients rightfully, but did not have masks, no social distancing, and no sanitizing. And they were in the territory where the perpetrator that they were going up against had the power there and then. And he arrested them on that ground, not because they were not doing the right thing, but because certain things are ignored. So even as we are challenging these systems and directives, we stay within them, but then challenge the illegality that comes out of them. I think it would be a better way for human rights defenders, even the human rights lawyers, to continue work at the end of the day. I think to also call for lessons learned. I think maybe what Uganda Law Society can do is pick lessons learned from the pandemic, what affected, the whole legal fraternity, put it on board and have lawyers discuss some of these things at the end of the day. The other thing is work necessarily is not going to office. We need to know that you can work everywhere and anywhere to ensure that, you deliver whatever you have to deliver in regard to work at the end of the day. Resilience and agility should be something that we should embrace going forward in our work, and we shouldn't give up, especially as human rights defenders. Let us develop coping mechanisms for whichever challenge comes, we have coping mechanisms so that we are able to survive and continue scanning the environment to assess these human rights situations going post-COVID. Okay, I can't say post-COVID because COVID is still here. So, but going forward in this COVID era, we need to have coping mechanisms to be resilient, to continue doing work. And it's through such platforms that we are being given, that we continue speaking through the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, through the taking advantage of the different advocates that deal in these issues and can technically tackle them and put them across very well. I want to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to interact with you and listen to me. I hope we have learned, unlearned, and relearned in this session. Thank you.
You must be a student of Professor Sylvia Tamale. Thank you very much, all of us who have attended. I want to recognize particularly the Digital Human Rights Lab who have been part of the conveners of this. Thank you very, very, very much. Those are among our partners who are trying to change the human rights conversation and approach when it comes to digital spaces. I would also like to recognize Council Nicholas Opio. I don't know if he's still in the chat room. Yes, he has been with us. We were with Dr. Businje Kavumba at the beginning. He jumped off. I'm sure he was particularly very interested in Council Tegule's argument on the constitutionalism, the constitutionality of the measures. We were also joined by Council Douglas Mawadri, and very many other people who have been with us. And I saw Arnold Kwesiga, director at UCA. Thank you very much for joining us. It has been a very great conversation, and thank you for the people online on Facebook who have joined us, and those ones who will see the recording. We wish you well. It has been a really great conversation. Human rights are not only limited to practitioners in those spaces, but I think they touch each and everyone. And each and every issue can be a human rights issue. Even commercial matters are human rights. That is why we have human rights-based approach these days in every aspect of business. Every venture these days has a human rights-based approach. Thank you very much. And from SRI, we appreciate, we hope to be part of many more conversations like this, many more arrangements, and even new organizations. You can always invite us to be part of this. From me, I'm signing out. Have a great evening.